What do you do if you don't have justice?
If you're forced to live in fear both day and night, do you run? Do you stay?
Do you fight? Do you pray?
Do you risk everything if you stand up for your rights?
What do you do if you don't have justice? If you're forced to live in fear both day and night, do you run? Do you stay? Do you fight? Do you pray? Do you risk everything if you stand up for your rights? Down throughout the centuries, down throughout the years, you'll find there's men and women who refuse to live in fear, refuse to take the second best, led by freedom's light. We'll stand up to injustice, stand up for what is right. What do you do if you don't have justice? If you're forced to live in fear of day and night, do you run? Do you stay? Do you fight? Do you pray? Do you risk everything? Stand up for your rights. What do you do if you're born into a world that's gone so wrong, where every day the weak are threatened by the strong, where if you try to raise your voice they'll tell you it's a crime, where just by being who you are your life is on the line? What do you do if you don't have justice? If you're forced to live in fear of day and night, do you run? Do you stay? Do you fight? Do you pray? Do you risk everything to stand up for your rights? What do you do if you don't have justice?
This was the moment they'd been waiting for 9 years. They knew it was a momentous decision and therefore a difficult time for the relatives. And so they tried to make it special. They got a local florist to donate some flowers and they put cloths on the table. And then, as people started to arrive, the tension began to build.
But let's go back to the beginning of the story. Patrick Shanaghan lived on a farm in County Tyrone with his mother, raising sheep. It was a good farm of land, and big too. The field stretched as far as the eye could see, which was unusual for a Catholic family in that area, surrounded as they were by loyalists. Now, if you went up the lane leading to their house, you could hear music, and the clickety-clackety sound of dancing feet as Patrick practiced his steps. One afternoon, his mother, Mary, went in to make a cup of tea and found Patrick with his shirt off, drenched in sweat. Mary said, "God, Patrick, where's the sense in that?" But Patrick said he just wanted to practice until he got it exactly right. He was a great dancer, a dance master, even though he had really big feet.
Now, every Friday, Patrick would pick up his sister Anna from school on his motorbike. Now, Patrick was known for always being late, but on Fridays he'd always get there on time. He'd leave the farm early and go the long way round to avoid the loyalist areas where he was vulnerable and arrive at the school. And Anna would come running out of the school really proud. She was going home on the back of her brother's bike, while the others were walking or on the bus. And she'd climb on, and lean forward, and just slip her hand into the pocket of his jacket and feel for the sweets that she knew he'd got for her. And as he revved up the engine and they took off out of the town, she'd lean forward with her other hand and feel in the other pocket for the chocolates that he'd bought for their mum and sister that day. As they sped home along the country lanes, she'd lean forward and give him a big hug, and just slip her hand down the front of his jacket and feel the bunty comic that he bought for her. And you could hear the cages flapping in the wind as they sped home to the farm.
Now, for Patrick and his 2 younger sisters, when they were growing up, the farm they lived on was one huge playground for them. There were places to hide, and trees to climb, and fields to run through. And Anna, in particular, had very fond memories of the sort of games that they used to play when they were younger. And she remembers in particular one summer when they decided to pretend to be in a cowboy movie. They sneaked a frying pan from their mum's kitchen and a tin of Spam, and then, in imagining they're out in the wild, wild west. They made a little campfire in the back garden and cooked their tea on it.
And on Sundays when they went to Mass in the little church at Achierne, and the men sat on one side and the women on the other, Patrick would always look over and smile at his sisters.
As Patrick got older, he became interested in Irish history and culture. He loved reading about it, and he had a great collection of books. He loved nothing better than discussing Irish history with his sisters until the early hours of the morning. Later, he joined Sinn Féin and worked for them during election time.
Laughing, running, climbing trees.
Remember,
Playing ball, hide and seek.
remember,
Childhood games in summer sun. Remember that you always knew you could never run from the shadow on the land. Remember, comic books and movie stars.
remember,
Holidays in Donegal.
remember,
Childhood games in the summer sun. Remember, but you always knew you could never run from the shadow on the land. Remember, motorbikes on country lanes.
remember,
Football dancing with your friends.
remember,
Teenage dreams in the summer sun. Remember, that you always knew you could never run from the shadow on the land.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ceilidh. I am your caller for this evening, and I've come here all the way from Whitehall in London to teach you how to dance. Now, the dance this evening is a traditional dance we British have been doing all over the world for centuries. In fact, so well established is the dance, we have our very own dance manual, Low Intensity Dancing, written by my very, very good friend, Brigadier Sir Frank Kitts. Just to give you a flavour. Freedom of the individual is not particularly important. There is also the question of cost. If we restrict troops to batons and gas, rather than conventional weaponry, we will require considerably more of them. Now, I don't know about you, but in these days of spin and presentation, I find that refreshingly honest. Now, the dance. There is one rule to the dance: keep control. There are two sides to the dance: our side and their side. So, without further ado, let the dance begin.
Emmett was a little boy of 6 years old. And like most kids of that age, there was nothing he loved better than being out on his bike and racing around and practising his skids and his wheelies. One day he said to his mum,
Mum, can I go out on my bike?
now his mother Tina was just on her way to the post office. Only a 10-minute walk, but if you were a Catholic, you knew you had to leave plenty of time for getting anywhere. Because you knew that you would get stopped and searched and questioned by the army and the RUC. And not just once. You could get stopped twice, 3 times, 4 times. And that 10-minute stroll could easily become a major expedition of an hour, hour and a half. Tina looked at her watch. She had plenty of time. Yes, Emmett, of course you can go and play. But Emmett, remember what I told you. Don't talk to the soldiers. Just keep away from them.
And Emmett knew exactly why. They'd been talking about it in the playground all week. You see, British soldiers had been going up to the kids and talking to them. And they'd come up to this one little boy, about 3 or 4, and they'd asked him about his mummy and his daddy and where they lived and had they got any guns. Well, the little boy looked up at the soldiers and said, yes. Well, the soldiers couldn't believe their luck. Within half an hour, they'd got the house surrounded. They'd smashed down a door and started digging up the concrete floor. They ripped out the gas cooker and all the central heating. And then they started drilling holes in all the walls and up through all the ceilings, ripped out everything in the attic. And then the petty stuff. Running a knife through a bag of sugar. Reading out really personal letters. Oh, they found the guns. 2 ornamental pistols above the fireplace in the living room.
Back to Emmett. There he was, in the playground, on his bike, racing around and practising his skids and his wheelies. And on the other side of the playground, there were 2 British soldiers watching. Suddenly, the chain came off Emmett's bike. He couldn't fix it, so he decided he might as well go home. But as he started to push his bike back in the direction of the house, those 2 soldiers were suddenly there, one on either side of him, asking questions.
What's your name? Where do you live?
Emmett said nothing. He kept his mouth shut and his eyes down and just kept pushing that bike. But they carried on asking questions.
Where's your manners? Where are you going?
Still he said nothing. But by this time he was beginning to feel uncomfortable. All he wanted to do was just get out of there as fast as he could. So he decided to have one more go at fixing that chain. And as he was there, kneeling on the floor, fiddling and pushing with the chain, those 2 soldiers were still there, one on either side of him, asking questions.
Does your mummy know you're out on the streets with that bike?
At that point, Emmett got the chain on. Well, he leapt on his bike and he pedalled off as fast as his little legs would carry him. And then, just before he was out of earshot, he turned round to the soldiers and said,
Does your mummy know you're out on the streets with that gun?
One morning, Patrick left home for work as usual, in his bright yellow, battered old van. Leaving the house, he saw a line of 3 RUC checkpoints at intervals down the bumpy lane which leads from their house to the road. So he got into his car, drove 10 yards down the lane to the first checkpoint, where the first RUC man said,
Stop! Get out of the van! What's your name? Where are you going?
After 20 minutes of questioning, Patrick got back into the van, drove on down the lane to the second checkpoint, where the second RUC man said,
Stop! Get out of the van! What's your name? Where are you going? Date of birth? Married or single? Leave this farm and go to the south.
After half an hour of questioning, Patrick got back into his van and drove to the bottom of the lane, to the third checkpoint, where the third RUC man said,
Stop! Get out of the van! What's your name? Where are you going? Date of birth? Married or single? Who do you meet? Who do you see? You'll not live long. You'll not see your next birthday, Shanaghan. So there we have it. That was the first part of the dance, and as you can see, there's something there for everyone. The whole community can join in. It doesn't matter whether you're a child at play, off to work, or just sitting at home in your own living room. You can all dance to our tune. Now, the second part of the dance, the solo. Now, I'm sure you'll agree there are always certain individuals who stand out, who have charisma, who command attention and respect. Now these are the kind of individuals who are liable to go off and do their own dance, so they must be singled out for particular treatment. Quoting again from the manual, every effort must be made to maintain within the civilian community the fear of the ultimate enforce the army might be prepared to use. I mean, how can you have a proper dance if someone's forever stepping out of line?
It was exactly 12 months after Patrick's father died that all the harassment started. You see, the local loyalists thought that with the father gone, it might be easy to drive off the son. They knew that no Catholic would buy that farm, surrounded as it was by loyalists. And they thought that if they could just get rid of the Shanaghans, then they could ensure that that good farm of land would end up in Protestant hands. And so they got the RUC and the army to do their dirty work for them. They set up checkpoints and roadblocks on the road by the farm and even on the lane leading up to the farmhouse. They raided the house again and again, turned it upside down and generally made life impossible for Patrick and his mother. And on one occasion when they raided, they took away photos of Patrick. Now everyone knew what that meant. It meant that those photos would end up in the hands of the loyalist death squads.
And the next time the soldiers came to the house, they stayed. They set themselves up in one of the outhouses with camping cookers. Every time Mary went to hang out her washing, there they were. It was horrible.
After one raid, Mary decided to go down into Castle Derg. So she went over to the outhouse, got out her bike, and set off down the bumpy lane. But the bike felt sort of wobbly. So she got off, pushed it back to the top of the hill, and called over to Patrick to come on over and take a look and see what's wrong. And do you know what he found? Every single nut, bolt and screw had been loosened to the point where they were just ready to fall off. And they'd done that absolutely deliberately, and they knew exactly whose bike it was.
On the farm in Tyrone, Patrick Shanaghan played in the trees from morning till night. When his father he died, trying to be man again, running the farm and acres of land. 10 long years they spent harassing him, 10 long years he'd done nothing at all. 10 long years they harried and tortured him, piling it on the Shanaghans all.
And so it went on, raid after raid, stopping him on the street day after day, week after week.
Stop! Get out of the van!
Never knowing when or where it might happen.
Stop! Get out of the van!
Then things started to get even worse. They started taking him to Castlereagh. Now Castlereagh is a name that would strike fear into anyone's heart.
A beating. A severe beating. They'd have this way of hitting you with the side of their hand and never leave any marks. They'd hit you with the palm of their hand on the side of your head or between your legs until you'd nearly pass out with the pain. And then they'd start in on you.
Sign this! Sign this!
There'd be statements that they'd written that you were to sign. And if you didn't sign, then they'd bend your fingers back and they'd spit in your mouth while you were screaming. Once, when Patrick's friend Hugh had been lifted, they tried a different tack. Now, Hugh's wife was expecting, so they told him, "Look, Hugh, I've got some really bad news. I'm sorry, but your wife's lost a baby. She's in the hospital. She's crying out for you. Just sign this, and you can be with her." Now, he knew this was the sort of dirty tactics they'd always use, so he never signed. But he never slept a wink all the time he was in there. And of course they were lying.
Sign this! Sign this! after a raid, they decided to take Patrick to Castlereagh. As they were bundling him into the back of the RUC Land Rover, one of the RUC officers caught sight of Mary Shanaghan, Patrick's mother, standing on the doorstep, shaking and looking frightened. He smirked, and keeping his eyes on Mary, said, "Patrick, say goodbye to your mummy. You won't see her again." Well, after they'd gone, Mary just collapsed into a chair, too weak, too distressed even to make herself a cup of tea. At that point, her elder daughter came over, also called Mary, and she stayed with her mother until Patrick had been released. And she did that every single time that Patrick was detained, whether it was for 24 hours, 2 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. Mary would stay with her mother until Patrick came home again.
10 long years they spent harassing him, 10 long years he'd done nothing at all. 10 long years they harried and tortured him, piling it on Shanaghan's all.
And how did Patrick react to all this? He never lost his temper, always kept his cool. One time, when he was stopped on the road, the RUC man said,
"What's your name?"
They knew full well who he was. "Patrick Shanaghan," he replied.
"Ah, Paddy. How do you spell that then?"
"Oh, any way you like." Now, this wasn't his natural temperament. By nature, he was a passionate and sometimes quick-tempered man. But he knew that this was the only way to handle it.
And throughout all this time, he carried on being the same kind, generous man he always was. Like once, when he was off to the ceilidh in the countryside, running late as usual, he saw an old woman carrying a bucket of water back from a well, and he stopped to give her a lift, and drove really slowly over the bumpy track to her farm, so as not to spill a drop. That's the kind of man he was.
He learned the steps and went to the ceilidhs all over Ireland, soon to be known. Paddy the master, always the gentleman, learning the dances and dancing the ball. 10 long years they spent harassing him, 10 long years he'd done nothing at all. 10 long years they harried and tortured him, piling it on the Shanaghan's all.
And the next time they dragged Patrick off to Castlereagh, they told him that his photos had been lost and had fallen into the hands of loyalist paramilitaries. And then they said, "We've had an SAS man looking through the peephole into your cell, taking a real good look at your face."
Whenever Patrick was detained in Castlereagh, when he was released, his sister Mary used to pick him up. And the first thing Patrick would do was ring his mother and let her know that he was okay. And then it was into the car, off home, have a shower, put on his dancing clothes and head off to a ceilidh. So outwardly, it didn't seem to affect him. But God knows what he was feeling inside. You see, with a lot of the men, when they came out of Castlereagh, you had to be careful with them for a few days. I mean, you couldn't ask them a direct question, not even something like, "Where's the salt?" But Patrick was different. It didn't seem to affect him.
But because of the harassment, people were scared to be seen with Patrick. At work, people wouldn't speak to him, and even some of his dancing friends wouldn't travel with him on those lonely country roads at night. But Patrick was sensitive about this. He didn't want people to be frightened. So if he went to visit people in their homes, he would park his yellow van away from their house so as not to attract the attention of the RUC or the soldiers.
One dark evening, as Patrick was setting off for a ceilidh, he got to the gate at the bottom of the lane, and he was just getting out of his van when an army flare burst in the sky, shedding a sort of ghostly blue light all round. And in the light of the flare, he could see that he was surrounded by British soldiers, all armed and with their rifles aimed directly at him. Now he knew that a soldier had been shot in Derry the previous week, and that if he moved, he was a dead man. So he stood, motionless, one hand on the gate and one to his side where it could be seen. There was total silence, just the hiss of the flare as it slowly fell towards the ground. Until the flare faded away and the soldiers melted back into the darkness. He waited a full 15 minutes, and then he got back into his van and went off to the Cayley.
10 long years they spent harassing him, 10 long years he'd done nothing at all. 10 long years they harried and tortured him, piling it on Shanaghan's all.
And despite all of this, or maybe because of all of this, Patrick just kept on dancing. And he went to a Cayley almost every single night, not just in Tyrone, but in Donegal, or Fermanagh, or further afield, to Armagh, even Kildare. One friend remembers going off for a dancing weekend with Patrick, right down in County Clare. And you know, almost every single town or village they drove through, somebody would recognise the bright yellow, battered old van, and they'd call out, "Hi, Patrick! Hi, Patrick!"
Patrick had a dog called Major. One evening, as Patrick was leaving the house, Major started a fierce barking and wouldn't stop. Now, Patrick knew what this meant. It meant there was someone close by. So he started walking as casually as he could from the front door of the house towards the van, all the while Major growling and barking at the darkness and baring his teeth. When he got to the corner of the house, Patrick darted to his right. A shot rang out. It hit the wall above his head. He ducked and ran. A second shot rang out and hit the wall again. He ran and ran and ran, didn't stop for a full 5 minutes. Everyone knew who it had been. And the RUC didn't even bother hiding it. They boasted about it and told Patrick's friend Eamon, "We won't miss the next time."
Well, after that attempt on his life, Patrick went away to Donegal for a few days to think things over. He was badly shaken, and he knew he had to make a decision. If he left, life would be easier for him. But if he stayed, well, he knew they would try again to kill him, and he couldn't expect to be lucky a second time. And it wasn't just himself he was thinking about. There was his mother, the farm, his sisters, the community. So it was a big decision. Do you run? Do you stay? In the end, Patrick made his decision, then went home. When he got home, he said to his mum, "Mum, I've been thinking of leaving." Mary said nothing.